Blessings, 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 blessings be unto you. This is Mercedes Warwick, and welcome to the Mindfulness of Healing. The Mindfulness of Healing is an associate program of sacredkey.com. Thank you for being here. Today's topic is very personal to me, and before we get started, I want to remember and remind you that I have this channel to talk about my spiritual journey and the experiences that I have evolved through during my visit here with stage 4 cancer, breast cancer. And so I remind you of this because this video may touch on some things that you need to do a deeper exploration, or you may need to get a therapist or talk to somebody in the mental health profession. However, I felt I do have some training as a yoga therapist and a life coach, and so there's sort of different gradations of how deep I would go into something as a professional before I would refer a client into the care of a licensed therapist. We go through so many different emotional states as we're going through an illness that can be chronic or potentially life-threatening. And it has been so interesting to me because I have been in my sacred sanctuary fairly closeted. Like, I could actually probably say in a lot of ways I've been in the cave for these last 5, and actually if you go back a couple of years before the official diagnosis, it would be somewhere between 6 or 7 years and to this date. And as I have emerged and am emerging into my new status of resolved, that I just received on my latest MRI, it has been very interesting to be able to contemplate and ponder how to really be back out into the world. And I'm finding that I'm a little sensitized. Like, I'm just more sensitive to things than I've been because I'm out in the world. I'm having more stimulus. So the month of June for the country as a whole, and for myself personally, and maybe you have found in your living, has been kind of a gold star month for us coming into awareness of who we are and how we want to live, how I am, who I am, and how I want to live. I'm going to try to keep this in the eye. And there has been a lot of things happen. I had a close relative pass away that I was not, when I say close, I mean in the lineage, not in relation. I had not spoken to them in many, many decades, actually. And something occurred that kind of triggered, that's going to be the word for this video, triggered me to realize a number of emotional feelings that I would not have acknowledged or even known were present in my ecosystem, in my divine ecosystem, this sacred temple of my body, mind, spirit, and soul. So that happened. I had somebody tell me a story about living and their wanting to be fully alive and what it would look like to be fully alive. But in order for them to realize what is a desire within their heart, it may re-trigger the cancer that was prevalent in their body. And watching this individual kind of go through that process. I am finding as I'm being out in the world more that I've had to have an understanding of what my morality and what my belief systems and what my principles are as it relates to interacting with other people. And that has been a really interesting journey and discovery. And then there's just what's going on in the world in general. And I'll be honest with you, when I haven't had to be out in the world. I watch the news through all of this because people ask me certain questions, and I want to be aware of what's happening in the world in general. But between the gun violence and the abortion issue, and what has come through the court systems, I quietly wept. My personal I couldn't see the neutral point. I couldn't see the balance point, because life is always present and life is always here. And even as we're transitioning out of our physical body, we are transitioning, in my belief system, we're transitioning into a new energetic living. It's still a living energy. So from my point of view, the chaos and the vitriol and the violence and the stoicness of people's convictions, I was weeping because I couldn't see how, as a country in particular, maybe even as a world in more macro or more generalized sense, how we were going to get into that sacred space of neutrality and balance. And my guidance was saying to see through the divine eye, to hear through the compassionate ear, and to breathe through the divine heart. I got a beautiful series of lessons and breathing sequences through that experience. So what and how do I feel when I am being triggered in a way that I may not be even fully conscious? There's not a conscious awareness of how I'm feeling. So the first thing is that a trigger for me is something that has kind of pushed a button, and there is a reaction as opposed to a response. And that reaction can look several different ways. But there is usually an external force that's triggering, that's pushing, that's prodding, that's poking me. And things start to ruminate. I will say right up front that in general, whenever I've been triggered, I usually can take it back into a fear response of my own. It's something that I'm fearing. And fear in my world is a lack of peace. So on the frequency of peace, there is not peace. There's more not peace than there is peace. And the frequency of love, same thing. More not love than a loving, expansive spaciousness. When I get in those states, I can't see, I can't hear, and I can't feel. I'm reacting as opposed to having a considered, compassionate observation and then a compassionate, considered response. Okay? How do I feel? So the first, I've made some notes so I'll remember here. So triggers can, one of the triggers will be, the tigers are coming, the tigers are coming, the tigers are coming. And there's a tensing in my body because I have to tense my body up in order to get away from that thing. and there's a feeling of dread in my stomach. Like my stomach even gets tense, and there's a sense of being unsafe. And this is the fight or flight response, and we're made in more conventional terms. The sympathetic nervous system kicks in. In other words, I'm being sympathetic to the stimulus that's in my environment. When we are in a parasympathetic response, bodily response, those are the things that are just the divine natural harmony. So I'm just breathing without thinking about it. I'm just, my heart is beating. The natural nature takes over, and there's a harmonious order to how my body is functioning. I believe that in my case, cancer was activated because I was in a never-ending, overstimulated fight or flight response, and I didn't know how to joyously have an enjoyment in my life. And so I was always ready to fight. And then I was always having to fix something. That's the other thing, fixing it. I gotta fix it, as opposed to allowing a solution to come forward. The second way I feel when a trigger has been pushed is I feel violated, like some personal boundary has been crossed. Somebody's been in my space in a way that feels I will use the word claustrophobic, but not honoring my physical boundaries and my I'm going to use in this case my emotional boundaries, my ego space, how I see myself, how I view myself, how I act as, how I feel that I present myself to the world. But it's all of the labels and titles and things like that, which are sort of ego driven. Ego's not always a bad thing. In metaphysics, we got to get rid of the ego. I don't prescribe to that. I think the ego serves a purpose and creates containers for us to be able to evaluate and define who we are in a living environment, in this realized world. Okay. The third thing that I feel and I experience when I've been triggered is I get extremely judgmental, and I get extremely defensive. I'll use that word. So I may have a value or a belief, and I'm willing to defend it. And in the extreme, I've never done this, but in the extreme, it's like what we're seeing in the world right now. There's all of these protests. There's physical gun violence that's happening because of belief systems. There's physical violence that's happening, gun violence in particular that's happening because somebody is in despair. There's physical violence that's happening because my way or the way I am is better than the way you are, physically, culturally, racially, spiritually, morality, and I am willing to defend it. So all the different gradations, to the extreme that we're experiencing, to in our personal space, I believe this and I am going to defend it. When I feel that way, I feel like I am not in balance. I'm not living in that neutrality, that balance point. I'm not in the one divine heart space. And a lot of times what happens with me, I may not even realize it, right? It's so deep-seated. It's the things that we may have learned as we were a child also, that this is right or wrong. and it can be something as simple as the macaroni and cheese recipe, and it could be something about what this family does and does not do in a certain situation, who our friends are and who our friends are not. So there's a whole gradation, a whole continuum of what being judgmental looks like. And then the final thing is a wave of sadness or despair. And I'm saying a wave because I don't think I've been in deep sadness or deep despair for quite a while. But I know that all of a sudden I could feel sad about something. And in my case, I have never felt regret until I experienced cancer. I didn't have the frequency of regret in my repertoire of emotions. But as I've gone through some treatment, it was like, oh, I never took that trip, right? Or, oh, I haven't experienced this love, this life, this moment, And so I would add to this sadness, despair, or regret. And when I have those feelings, matter of fact, the first time I felt regret, it had to be defined for me because I didn't know what the feeling was. I'd never lived my life as regret. And as part of my cancer journey, I've had to work some of those things through. Not many, but a few things through. And face my truth. Face my truth. I've had some contribution in some of the things that I have come to regret, right? But the thing is, none of these things that I have spoken about are rational necessarily. You may not even know why you're feeling the way you're feeling. You may just feel a little off, or you may feel some, almost we would say, irrational anger about something, and you're not even certain what it is and why it's happening. So that's why I'm so glad for my practice, and because most of the time, most days, I have at least 2 prescribed times that I am going to sit and be in contemplation and also in spiritual inquiry. But there are times when I go to sit that I am so uncomfortable and so fidgety and so, I would use the word agitated, that it's hard to just be there. And this is one of the few times that I would say that's when somebody says, well, is work, is that most of the time my communion with Holy Spirit at the beginning and end of the day and throughout the day is not work. And we, in our Tuesday meeting, one of the golden nuggets that came up was, we're not in the work, we're in the awareness. So we're living and practicing our divine awareness. We're practicing being divinely human, and it is a lifestyle. There are times, especially at night, if I've had a day, that, to take that last sitting, consciously take that last sitting and those last breaths. If nothing else, I breathe, and to take those breaths and to know that I'm placing myself on the continuum, into my divine spaciousness instead of the density of the human divinity. The body is still the divine energy. It's just vibrating at a slower speed so we can use it as we're living in this place, in this place called Earth. So I think that is, let's see, 19 minutes. Okay. So that is the definition of what the triggers are. And in my next video, I'm going to talk to you about what I do to release them, and the breathing sequences and the wisdom key that bubbles up as I'm moving through these very surprising, unexpected points of evolution and discovery and discernment. I think that is enough for now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Blessings be unto you. Look for part 2. All right. Namaste.